Namaskar. Fascism theory and practice, one which concentrates on the more theoretical and historiographical aspects of fascism research. The book's main argument is twofold. On the one hand, Dave sets himself firmly in opposition to the approach taken by recent scholars, including Roger Griffin, Jeff Sternhall, Roger Idwell, and Stanley Penny, which has, it is sometimes claimed by its own practitioners, produced a new consensus in fascism studies. On the other hand, he presents a sympathetic account and historical survey of the Marxist tradition of writing about and against fascism as his preferred alternative approach. What is wrong with the leading proponents of fascism studies? They believe that their detailed examination of fascism text and ideological pronouncements exaggerate the significance of what the fascism said while de-emphasizing the things which they did. Fascist ideas in themselves are not especially interesting, and the attempt to delineate the detailed structure and content of fascism ideology seems to give fascism a static or timeless character, which it certainly lacked. Nor are fascism studies politically natural. Dave deplores those workers which seek to locate a revolutionary or socialist content in the fascist project. He opposes the apologetic ambitions of some writers who seek to emphasize the difference between Italian and German fascism in order to attempt to rehabilitate the former, and he worries about the malign political effects such works might have in an era of fascist revival across Europe. The philosophers have only interpreted fascism in various ways, but the point is to prevent it. Above all, above all, by treating fascism principally as a distinct constellation of ideas about politics and society. Dave thinks these approaches miss its essence as a reactionary mass movement. The line of analysis developed by Marxist thinkers and which he expounds in the second half of the book. According to this analysis, fascism is a mass movement which originates outside of the mainstream state institutions, which flourishes in the wake of the failure of socialist advance, and which articulates the grievances of a section of insecure middle class which feels itself squeezed between the big capitalist and the organized proletariat. Fascism only achieves state power when conservative elites attempt to co-opt the energy of the fascists for their own purposes, and in government fascists are only able to promote the cause of big capital, with the result that the regime can only seek to displace the contradiction between the constituents it claims to represent and the interest it in fact serves through racial persecution, foreign expansion, and war. Dave presents us with the both left and right variants of Marxist account of fascism. The left deviation sees fascism as chiefly or only a tool of capitalist reaction, a mode of governance adopted by the ruling class in order to smash the independent organization of workers in a time of social crisis. The rightist deviation, by contrast, refused to see fascism as an elite movement and argued that it was a mass movement which did not require the patronage of capitalists for its existence, for it enjoyed alternative bases of popular support. The third or dialectical approach to fascism, which rejects both of these theories as being too simplistic, drew on some of the insights they helped to provide in order to develop a form of analysis which always kept the contradictions and tensions at the heart of fascist project at the center of analysis. Dave finds the earliest statements of this dialectical approach in writing by Clara Zetkin and Willa Sass from 1923, and he shows in a valuable and informative historical survey how the richest Marxist writings on fascism followed in this third tradition. The Comintern itself officially adopted the left theory, later extending its logic into the Grosch equation that social democracy equals social fascism, so that by the time the Nazis were winning mass support in Germany, the only interesting work on the nature of fascism was being produced by Marxists working outside Stalin's suffocating embrace. A distinguished cohort which included John Strachey, August Thalheimer, Ignacio Silon, Antonio Gramsci, and of course Leon Trotsky. A short book with a wide range of reference and polemical intent is bound to throw up grounds for contention and disagreement, and Dave does not disappoint. He attacks on the fascism studies crowd is welcome for a number of reasons, but I found Dave at times too swift to dismiss important and interesting arguments. Dave rightly mocks the claim that fascism was in fact a variant of leftist or Jacobean politics, but the affinities between left politics and fascism do run deeper than he is prepared to acknowledge. The ideational study of political ideology is not as necessarily wherein as Dave suggests, and the theoretical and empirical writing of a scholar like the historian of British liberalism, Michael Frieden might offer a stimulating model for writing the history of ideologies in a satisfying, dynamic way. Dave further opposes studies that concentrate on fascist ideology because he believes the ideas themselves are of no interest or value. Yet his condemnation is too brutal, and the study of fascist ideology and of its lingering appeal remain of enormous interest and vital importance. Why was Nazi Germany the first country to launch a public health crusade which stressed the link between smoking and lung cancer? Why do distinctively fascist strains continue to resurface in the rhetoric of contemporary political leaders from Newt Gingrich to Tony Blair? And while Dave is quite right to call for a critical attitude towards fascism in scholarship, at times he seems to confuse being critical with being oppositional. A critical attitude is precisely not one of blanket condemnation, and it remains important to be able to formulate nuanced judgment about fascist ideology and practice without inviting charges of apologetics or political irresponsibility. These reservations, however, and other like them, apply mainly to aspects of the style of Dave's presentation are thoroughly debatable and do not touch his core argument. It is this that I want to engage in the rest of this review. Dave likes the Marxist approach to thinking about fascism, first because it seems to him to capture the nature of fascism better than the fascism studies paradigm, and second because its focus on the constitutive contradiction of fascism provide a way of beginning to formulate effective strategy of anti-fascist action. Dave challenges fascist studies precisely because its practitioners claim that the era of fascism is over and that fascism can now be studied just like any other historical phenomena. Dave's book, on the other hand, begins and ends with concerns about the importance of anti-fascist action in contemporary Europe, and it is clear that he judges strategies of academic injury in part by their possible contribution to an anti-fascist politics. Nor is it clear that nor is it clear that he was wrong to do so, but the historical analysis he takes over from his distinguished Marxist predecessors does not seem to generate a plausible enough analysis of historical origins of fascist politics to justify his claim for superiority of Marxist tradition of analysis. Men make their own history, proclaimed Marx in one of those splendid sentences that opened the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, but they do not make it just as they please, but under circumstances directly found, given, and transmitted from the past. Bourgeois scholars like Barrington, Murray, Gregory, Lubert have taken this warning to heart, dwelling deep into the political and class structure of European societies for clues as to why certain nations succumbed to fascist rule and others did not. Dave's historical analysis of the rise of fascism begins by contrast round about 1919, far from considering the constraints imposed by patterns of historical development. Dave stresses the open terrain of politics between the war. Italy and Germany could have gone in different directions towards workers' control, towards bourgeois democracy, and towards fascism. Dave acknowledges the inheritance of the past, but immediately dilutes its importance. There was backwardness in both Italy and Germany, but it is hard to see it as decisive. On its own, it might not it might not have been decisive. True, other late industrializing economics did not become fascist, but when we consider the histories of Germany and Italy in the period since unification, it is hard to avoid the conclusion that the strengths of rapid modernization, coupled with the failure to consolidate a functioning parliamentary democracy in both countries before the Great War, played an important role in enabling fascists to destabilize those regimes afterwards. In Germany, for example, rightists had little link to organize in political parties before the war, as the democratically elected Reichstag possessed very diffuse power of its own. In Italy, a restricted franchise was in place for far longer, and parliamentary politics was far more a matter of elite patronage and clientelism than of partisan or ideological confrontation, as parliamentary politics resumed after Versailles, this time with universal suffrage in Italy and a democracy regime in Germany. Right-wing political leaders lacked stable and stabilized formations like the British Conservative Party, long resigned to the need to contest periodic elections. The right-wing political scene in Germany and Italy was more fluid, and the political and economic chaos of the post-war years threw up opportunities upon which the fascist movement was swift to capitalize. The Republican government in France, by contrast, never came close to being subverted, though France, like Italy, suffered horribly during the Great War and experienced severe political and economic difficulties afterwards. The fascists in Paris provided oppositional street theatre rather than a fundamental threat to the regime, whose electoral institutions they were never able to penetrate. The right-wing electorate was too well organized at a local level to allow that to happen, and France had by 1980 almost 50 years to adjust to the demand of the politics of universal manhood suffrage. And as the French right is now more personality driven, French rights is now more personality driven, as the demands of presidential politics emphasize top-down patronage rather than bottom-up grassroots organization, and and as the electoral system has more proportional elements of the kind that enable fringe groups to flourish in elected chamber. Considerations these considerations also help us these considerations also help us to see why France has a bigger problem than other European countries with the far right today. Dave insists that the era of fascism might not be over, as capitalist crisis still produces misery and misery may still throw up fascism. The true enough, but when we examine some of these more detailed explanations of fascist success, Dave's model comes to seem crude and mechanistic by comparison, a far cry from the Marxist demand for concrete analysis and dialectical explanation. And if there are many more factors at work which help to generate large-scale fascist politics than the miseries included by capitalism, then it becomes much less clear that the tactic of the United Front will always and everywhere the most suitable strategy for resisting any renewed fascist advance. Finally, if we are going to analyze contemporary far-right formation, it is vital that we pay attention to the differences that obtain between these movements and their predecessors, as much as to their similarities and continuities. We need to think about how new, post or just straightforwardly fascist parties today stand in relation to existing institutional structures of power and of memory, and about how their own strategies are going to differ from the one employed by the far right in interwar Europe. It is too easy to exert, as Dave does, that the rise of fascism in 1990s Europe can be compared to the rise of fascism in 1930s. The same processes are here. The film wins, but for the moment at a slower speed. For in those same stirring pages at the start of the 18th Brumaire, Marx criticized revolutionaries of 1848 who anxiously conjured up the spirits of the past to their service and borrowed from their names, but battle slogans and costumes in order to present the new scene of the world history in the time-honored world history in this time-honored disguise and this borrowed language. Marx's contemporaries reacted the dramas of 1790s, but the historical context has changed utterly, and with it the meaning and implications of the their otherwise identical actions changed also. Marx knew that the 60 years between 1789 and 1848 were a long time in politics, and we should not underestimate the ability of the 60 years between 1930s and the present to have transformed the problem posed by far right politics in quite far reaching ways. Thank you so much. Thank you.